Welcome to Otherworld. I'm your host, Jack Wagner. So, I've been sitting here for quite a while trying to figure out how I'm going to introduce this episode because there's a lot of ways to interpret this story you're about to hear. And I think everybody's going to have their own very unique reaction to it. Me personally, I find the story very profound, and I've been thinking about it a lot ever since I did this interview. You know, I of course love hearing paranormal stories, but for me personally, what I'm most interested in is how these people react to these extreme moments in their life and how these moments factor into their life as they move forward or how they don't factor in. And I think this is a very interesting case of that, for me at least. But I anticipate that everybody's going to have their own reaction, and I think that's good. So it's probably best if I just start this one out and let the person tell the story themselves. This comes from a guy named Russell. He's a woodworker, and he's actually been working since he was 13 years old, believe it or not. His dad owned a construction company, and he's been doing construction since he was old enough to be out there. Very hardworking guy, serious, by the book, numbers type guy, not a type of dude you would expect to be emailing a paranormal podcast, and I'm pretty sure that Russell himself was very surprised to find himself emailing me. So I think you're really going to enjoy this story. It's best if I let him explain it himself. This is episode 16. The title is Everything Goes Black, and you're listening to Otherworld.
Hello? Yes, it is.
We're still rolling?
Yeah, let us know when you're ready.
Okay.
Samo in the Pacific Island for
This is a story about.
So, hello, my name is Russell Wild, and I experienced a pretty interesting day once when I was 14 years old. I have been working since I was about 13 years old, mainly doing, like when I was 13, obviously couldn't get a job at a restaurant or anything, so I would like mow lawns, I would help out doing like random trade work, like as like a general laborer, things like that, just because I always loved being able to have my own money and being able to spend it how I wanted to. During the school years, I would always have a job, and then I would save up all of my money during the school year. And then during the summer, where a lot of my friends were doing things, like hanging out with friends or like going to the skate park and stuff, I would just blow all my money on and go somewhere and do something, mainly I did that like whenever I was in high school. But before that, have always been working. It's something I kind of like pride myself in. But when I was 14 years old, my dad was a co-owner of a company known as Blackfoot Resource Group. And what this company did was they would clear land for basically like large-scale building projects. Think of it as like cul-de-sacs, giant mansions out in the middle of nowhere, all types of different types of housing developments, golf courses, but mainly those two, like golf courses and large-scale housing developments. And I started working with him just because mainly I wanted to start learning how to use heavy machinery. I'd never done that before. And usually I wouldn't work over the summer. Usually I would just spend all my money over the summer. But he talked me into working with him over the summer. And he said, we'll travel a lot, mainly, around the South. But you get paid really, really good money. I think I was the only 14-year-old that was making, right around $880 every 2 weeks, I think is like what my pay rate was. All under the table, of course. But I thought it was a good opportunity because I really wanted to learn how to use like bulldozers, front-end loaders, and like track hose and things like that. And so I took him up on it. And it started becoming like really, really fun. Especially just being able to just be out in the middle of nowhere 24/7 and kind of having time to myself, just listening to music, driving around and doing what was needed. My main job that I did while in between like learning how to use machines and everything is that I was basically a fire manager. So what we would do is whenever we would clear land, so we would start off, imagine like a giant, huge swath of like forest that they want to develop and turn into housing development of some kind. We would go in and first we would clear all of the trees and make roads according to, where the like architects and the surveyors said that we needed to. And we would clear all those trees out. And the trees that were big enough, we would sell to lumber yards or people that owned like mulch companies and things like that. And then the trees that were too small to sell for lumber, we would always just pile them in these large, giant piles, and then we would set them on fire and we just burn them. I don't necessarily know if that's the best way to go about doing it, but that's just what my dad's company did. And it was me and the other co-owner's son. His name was Little Robert. And my name is Little Russell because we're both named after our fathers. And we would just drive around on this 3-wheeler that had a diesel tank attached to the back of it. And we would either manage the fires, make sure that they're going, keeping them burning, and also making sure to check them to see if there was any type of spread or anything like that. We would, throw water on them if they were getting a little too big. We would pour a little bit of diesel on them to get them to pick back up to kind of burn a little bit quicker. And then we would also refuel machines depending on where anybody was at on these like really, really large plots of land. And so that was pretty much what we did. We would make a route, know where all of our burn piles are. We would drive around all day, just checking on a pile, moving on to the next one, checking on it, moving on to the next one. Somebody would come in on a walkie-talkie and be like, hey, the front end loader is about to be out of juice. Can you come and fill it up? If the diesel tank ran out, we would go back to what would be like basically home base. So a lot of the times, especially in some of the more remote plots of land, instead of having all of us rent hotels and everything, so we would work on, week off schedules. So you would work for a week and then you would go home for a week. It was a lot easier to rent these mobile homes. They're like these small mobile homes, and they would drive them out and basically put them in the middle of the property. And that's where everybody kind of lived and stayed, was on these little mobile homes. And that way we didn't have to drive every single night, sometimes anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes to get to the closest, hotel. This particular day that I'm talking about was taking place in like Okefenokee, Georgia. We were on this large property of land, a lot of, not necessarily so much marshy, but there had definitely like heavy cedar and cypress area. And there had been plans that the center of the property, there was going to be a large lake, a man-made lake that we were in the process of digging out, and then a bunch of roads that had just been cleared, and we had just laid down dirt, basically making them almost, if you've ever been in like a national park, they basically just looked like access roads at this point. And then we were slowly carving out all of the different plots for all of the different houses that were going to be there. Our route was on this big basic loop. Actually, it was big, huge loop that would go around the perimeter of the property and then was intersected by other different access roads and planned roads that were going to be developed way later on. And it was about, I would say, probably about like 3:30 that we were on the southern side of the property, and we were kind of just looking at this fire. We just added a little bit of diesel to it, and we were kind of just sitting there making sure that we were looking at it for a little while until we moved on to the next one to make sure that it wasn't going to jump. If there was any like loose leaves or anything like that, we would rake it around the fire to make sure there was only dirt and trying to basically separate any type of fire line that might start. And I'm sitting on this 3-wheeler, and little Robert is in front of me, and he's kind of like looking at the fire pit, and he gets a blurb on the walkie-talkie, and it's my dad, and he's basically saying, I don't know if you guys can see it, but we just noticed that there's going to be a huge storm heading in, and we don't work in the rain, just because it makes everything that much more difficult. And so he said, this one's probably going to looks like it's going to be pretty big. So you guys were just going to cut it for the day. Just head back to the mobile home. We're going to start making dinner early for everybody. And that's pretty much it. Just head back onto the house. And as soon as I was like, I went and I was like talking to him on the walkie-talkie, and I look at the walkie-talkie and it says 3:45 on the walkie-talkie, and I turn around looking at the southern side of the field, and it is definitely one of the largest storms I've ever seen. And I grew up in Florida, so but it was coming up over the tree line on the far, far, far other side of the field. But it was just huge. It was taking up all the sky. It was just these giant, thick, heavy, dark clouds. And there's lots of thunder. I can see lightning every once in a while. And so we hop on the three-wheeler and we start barreling down this access road. And Robert would always speed on a three-wheeler, and it freaked me out like nobody's business, especially like any hill you jump over. My butt would get lifted up off the back of the three-wheeler and like slam back down. And there's plenty of times where he would like take a turn, and if anybody is familiar with three-wheelers, if you're going really fast and you take a turn too quickly, the first thing the thing's going to do is just immediately flip over, and you're going to tumble off into who knows what. And so he would literally hit a turn quick enough to where he would like lean over, and he would like ride on two wheels for a little while and freak me out, and then jump it back down. So needless to say, he's just hauling butt down this road, and I'm gripping on to the shoulders of his shirt, and I start immediately feeling raindrops. And these raindrops were like huge, they were like pelting my back and my neck. It was very heavy rain, it was like almost, I was like starting to get a back massage, and it all basically came at once. It was like a curtain of water just zoomed over us. And now we're just in just constant, like super, super, super heavy rain. And the road immediately begins to get like super muddy, and mud is flying up, and it's getting all over my clothes, all over his clothes. And I'm trying to tell him like slow down. I can't see anything. And he's like, don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. And it was just so hard to see, just because one, you have rain hitting in your face, you have mud flying up, and he's just gunning because he wanted to get out of the storm and he wanted to get home. And there's a turn that's coming up, and as soon as I guess he didn't see it because he would, obviously he couldn't, but there's what looked to be like a very like large log or tree limb that had basically, I guess, fallen, right around that moment of the storm. I'd never seen it before in the road, and we usually, anytime we would drive down the road and we would see something laying in the street, we'd pick it up and toss it off. So I guess it had fallen just recently from the storm, but yeah, he didn't see it. And I remember the front of this three-wheeler, basically hitting this log, and I go off into the air. I see the grass and the bushes and the dirt like just flying underneath me, because I was up in the air, and it's the last thing that I truly remember. And as my body's flying through the air, I begin to twist, and my head begins to turn up towards the sky. And for just a moment, I can see like the trees and the sky, and then everything just goes black. And I wrecked, I guess. The next thing that I remember is basically like becoming aware that I was still laying, I was awake, I guess, but my eyes currently weren't open, but I could see, with my eyes closed, you can see like the sun whenever it reflects through your eyes, and your eyes are all orangey and yellow whenever you close your eyes, And that was the first thing that I consciously remember, was like the sun like hitting my eyes, and I open my eyes and I can feel my hands in grass, and I am like feeling with my hands, and one of the first things I notice is that like nothing's wet, and like the dirt in my hands was very dry, like extremely dry. And I sit up and I'm in like about knee-high tall grass and shrubs. And I'm looking around, and there's no storm. It's a bluebird day. The sun is out, and I can hear birds. I can hear mosquitoes and flies buzzing around, and I'm on the side of the road. And I look. The first thing that I take notice of, is the three-wheeler, and it's actually just parked right on the side of the road, and it's still running, and it's not, broken. It's not like disheveled or covered in mud or anything like that. And it's just sitting there. It's just running. And I turn my head around me and behind me where, cause I was laying down and I just sat up, like I'm still like sitting on my butt. And right behind me, was a tree branch. It was like a tree limb, like a very large tree limb. I stand up and I'm trying to like feel my body, trying to figure everything out. And I don't feel any physical pain. I'm not bleeding. My clothes aren't disgusting and muddy. The only thing that was really different was that I had a bunch of grass on my butt, from the grass. And right at that moment, I see little Robert coming out of the woods from the opposite side of the road, and he's like buckling up his pants. And I run over to him, and I'm just like, "Are you okay? Oh my God! Like, what happened to you? Like, what happened to the storm? What are we?" I'm very confused, and he looks at me like I'm absolutely crazy, and he's like, "What are you talking about? I just had to go pee real quick. What are you doing laying in the grass?" And I'm extremely perplexed. I'm extremely freaked out, and so I ask him for the walkie-talkie, and I grab the walkie-talkie to walkie-talkie my dad. And as soon as I grab the walkie-talkie, on the screen of the walkie-talkie, the first thing that happens whenever you light it up is that it shows the time first. I look at the walkie-talkie, and it says 2:36 p.m., which again did not make any sense to me. Whenever the last time that I looked at the walkie-talkie, it said 3:45. And so I hit up my dad, and I'm asking him, like, "Are you still at home base? Did the storm pass? We got in a wreck, and he is asking me, he's like, "What storm are you talking about?" And I was like, "The storm, the big, huge storm. Like there was, and as I'm talking to him, I'm saying this, I'm like looking around, and, the road is dry. There's no dew on anything, there's no storm clouds overhead. Everything is just completely clear, and it's like a normal day." And my dad basically was just like, "I don't know what you're talking about. If you're not feeling okay, come back to the house and, we'll talk. But why don't you stop?" And I think what he really thought was maybe I was messing around with him or something. Later on, I asked him about that, and he basically was just like, we still got work to do, and the day's not over. And so I had to work the whole entire rest of that day. And later on in the day, when we're eating dinner, I'm constantly asking, everybody, like, "No, this happened. Like I was in a wreck," and everybody just keeps looking at me like I'm a crazy person. And that's pretty much like the end of like the story part of it. But I've never had an answer. I have never been able to figure out exactly how I experienced something, and I should have, I should have had a broken limb, I should have had a concussion by the very least, and asking my dad about it, he's kind of under the impression of maybe I had a concussion. And, whenever I go into him with all the details and everything, he basically said that, whenever Robert hopped off of the three-wheeler to go take a leak out in the woods, I must have hopped off the three-wheeler and, did something on the other side and tripped and fall and hit my head, and maybe suffered some type of concussion that changed my memories of the whole entire event. But it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because and how could I have, had a concussion, woken up from it, and been perfectly fine and coherent afterwards with only the span of about 2 minutes, which was what Robert said was the only time that he was away from me, because he said, I had to take a pee. So I stopped the three-wheeler, hopped off to go take a leak, and I came back, and you were running through the grass like a crazy person, asking me about some storm, and and so to this day, I have no idea what happened, but it did happen to me. I remember the day and incredibly well, and it's just something I've never been able to have an explanation for. As far as, all the events leading up till that moment, everything else, according to talking with Robert, happened the exact same, except whenever we were on the south side of the property, he remembers, that particular fire patch. And he said all we did was, we threw some diesel on it. We looked at it for a little while, and then we left and we started going along the route, which is along the northeast side of the plot of land. And even that to me also doesn't make any sense at all, because if I looked at that walkie-talkie and it said 3:45, how come the next time that I looked at it, it said 2:36? And there's just a lot of things that don't make sense about the whole entire ordeal. Mainly that everybody that I've ever talked to about it that was there that day, or Little Robert in particular, just say that never happened.
Okay, so this is a very strange story, and for that reason, I'm sure everybody has a ton of questions. I certainly did. That's why the second half of this episode is going to be me asking Russell a lot of those questions. I don't know if we're ever going to have all the answers to what happened. If you ask me personally, I don't think it matters if we have all of the answers. My opinion is that Russell, he was given a second chance. And I personally think it would be best if he just took that as a gift and carried on with his life. That being said, I don't think human nature allows us to simply do that. We always have a ton of questions. We always want to explain things away. That's just kind of how we are, unfortunately. We tend to focus on the bad and ignore the good, usually, or forget about it. So I had a ton of questions for Russell. This is an edited down version of those questions. I included the most relevant answers. I tried to include all of the relevant answers, but just so you know, there's obviously a million questions I asked him that weren't included because they didn't have an answer or the answer was not helpful. So let's get back into it. Okay, I have a lot of questions.
Totally.
So this is not what I want to ask first, but I think we need to tackle it first because this is what everybody's going to be asking. The log. You pointed out the log. How big was the log?
Yeah, and this is just me, like I said, I'm a woodworker, so you learn how to eyeball lengths, but it was about a little bit thicker than my thigh, it's not necessarily like a log that you lay down to chop other wood on top of, so it's not necessarily anything like that large, but it was large enough to where that type of break on it, wouldn't make sense, to me, at least, thinking about it in hindsight, wood doesn't break like that, unless it's petrified or something, that's the only time that you try to see that jaggy, rock, crack, but it was literally just cracked open. Was it
cracked in half?
Yes, it was completely cracked in half, and it was indented into the ground, ever so slightly, but it also, it didn't, and I don't necessarily know if I can say this, with 100% certainty, just because I am like talking about a memory, but from the way that it looked, it didn't look like it was just there. It looked like it had been there for a while. It wasn't like any type of debris or anything like that made it look like it had fallen there. It looked like obviously it had fallen there. But
was there a tree nearby?
There are so many trees nearby.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's like forests. Yeah, there's like forests on opposite side, mainly like pine and cedar, I believe.
My next question was going to be if it looked like it had been there, because you could kind of...
Yes, it did look like it had been there for a while. So it didn't look like it wouldn't have looked like my head had been the one that had broken that limb, and
it
also,
looked like it had been there, so you could have just as easily laid down and been like, hey, I'm going to rest my head on this, use a log as a pillow.
Totally. Yeah. And it would have been about that size to where I could have laid down and like rested my head on it. But definitely thick enough, like I said, to where you couldn't just break it with your own two hands, or it would have been a lot of force to be able to just break something like that was that thick. Because
I know that's what people are going to jump to, but I don't think that's the case for a few reasons. But mainly, you've done construction. Obviously, you worked for this company. Or you're a woodworker now. You know wood, and you saw this log, and you know that if this log hit a 14-year-old boy in the head, it would at least hurt, if not kill you.
Yeah, no, at the very, very least, it would have definitely hurt. And for my little boy noggin, to be able to hit it with that amount of force, at the very least, there would have been blood and a very serious concussion,
Did you have
if not,
pain?
like my brain would have been splattered. No, I had no pain. Like I said, I was perfectly fine. I felt extremely coherent, besides the fact that, obviously things weren't adding up in that regard, but I didn't have any bruises, and with the amount that I flew, because I remember going into the air, and like I said, some of the last things that I saw was the grass and the bushes like zooming underneath me, and then my body turned in a counterclockwise motion right before I blacked out. So I remember spinning kind of a little bit to the counterclockwise, and I kind of remember seeing like the tops of the trees and then like the stormy sky, and then that's like right before I blacked out. And so that amount of speed, we weren't wearing helmets, you know what I mean? We didn't barely wear eye protection, so if I got thrown from that three-wheeler, because we were hauling, we were trying, like, Robert wanted to get home, he did not want to be wet, and the amount that it was raining, it was so much rain. I've grown up in Florida all my life, and you have all day rainstorms, sometimes multiple days where it'll just be raining the whole entire time, but not like the best way that I could describe it is like, how whenever Forrest Gump starts in the movie Forrest Gump, and he starts talking about all the different types of rain,
Mm-hmm.
and like this was big, heavy rain in his words, it was so much rain. And, I got thrown because we were hauling. So if I did hit it, right, there's no way that I could have just got up without even a bruise. Like I said, I didn't have a bruise. There was no blood. I didn't have a headache. I didn't have anything. It was like I woke up from a nap,
I could tell how vivid of a memory this is, because you're still eliminating the possibility that like the crash did happen to you. Like you're still in the mindset that maybe it did, because you're saying it's like it. And I know because like that was your day. Like that was the day. It seems to me that it feels like you lived this certain day and then jumped into a different timeline. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's like, I guess the way that you could definitely put it. Yeah, is that I remember, all of the events that led up to it, and it was just, like I said, it was just a normal, boring day beforehand, and then all of a sudden, my dad comes on the walkie-talkie and he's like, "Hey, there's this big storm coming in," and then I turn around and literally it's just right over the tree line on the far other side of this large hayfield, and then at that point, my brain kind of got sidetracked because Robert's like, let's get on the bike. Let's go. I don't want to have to ride through the rain. And it was moving so fast because we were on the three-wheeler for, like I said, maybe 10 minutes before it just came over us like a curtain. And it was just all of a sudden, boom, rain everywhere, thunder, lightning. And then we hit that log. And the log also, another thing, like when I woke up, the log was gone. That log that was in the road wasn't even there.
Were you in the same area when you woke up?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say, like, if anything, I was a little bit after that curve where we hit the log. Oh,
that's interesting because you
not like a large distance though. Like if I could think about it anyway, if I was to get thrown from that three-wheeler, right, I woke up probably like where I would assume I would have landed, because I got thrown off to the right. And it was like kind of pretty much like right on the other side of the turn.
But that's interesting because let's, by the way, just for the sake of ease, let's call the timeline where you were in the storm, like that day, let's call that timeline 1. And timeline 2 is whatever Robert Jr. lived. And everybody else was in timeline 2. You woke up in timeline 2. Let's just say that.
Yes.
So I find it interesting because in timeline 1, where it started to stray off, that was in a way different area, and you rode through chaos and rain and ended up exactly in the same spot where you woke up in timeline 2.
But earlier in the day.
Another
thing that makes no sense at all to me,
So that leads me to my other question of when do you think these timelines went out of sync? Like, is there a point where your day and Robert Jr.'s day matches up, like the morning?
Yeah, I actually called him about this because I haven't talked to him in 13 years, but I called him and had a very fun, awkward conversation, having to make him try and like relive this whole experience. But basically, we remember everything pretty much the exact same way, leading up right until we took that break at the southern side of the field. We'll call it like burn pile 1, basically. And he says like the only kind of like real difference was he said that we didn't spend a lot of time there. Like we went there, we did, we checked on it, threw a little bit of diesel on it, sat there for maybe, a minute to 2 minutes, making sure that it's, burning okay and like small, because we didn't ever want, whenever you're doing this, like these burn piles, you don't want the flames to be large. You want them to be burning in the center, and you want it to be low fire and slowly burning as everything kind of collapses in on it. And so we just made sure that there wasn't any like embers that were going to be like lifting off anytime soon or anything like that. And, raked it out a little bit, and then we, left. But to my memory, we were kind of hanging out there for a little while because he had to manage it a little bit more because it wasn't like it was completely out when we got there. And so we were hanging out there for a little bit more longer of time. And then my dad hits me up on the walkie-talkie, and the everything continues after that. But that's to me that even kind of adds more confusion to the thing because of the whole time difference. If when I checked that walkie-talkie, it was 3:45, and then when I checked it the second time, it was 2:36. Like I can't do that math in my head, but it's roughly right around anywhere between 30 to 45 minute difference.
So that difference is about how long you would have stayed at that burn pile, like kind of tending to it, maybe?
In normal circumstances, no, not unless it needed to be micromanaged, Like sometimes we would hang out at a burn pile just because there was a lot more leaves, on the pile than. But
in your memory,
we were kind of comfortable. In my memory, we were hanging out there for, I would say, maybe 8 to 10 minutes. Okay. We were hanging out there before I got hit up on the walkie-talkie about the storm. So,
but when you saw the time for the storm, did that time make sense to you?
Yes, that time made total sense to me. And we had been, as far as everything else throughout that entirety of the day, everything was moving accordingly. But, I guess like in timeline 2, which is little Robert's timeline, everything just moved that much quicker, if that makes sense. I don't have that's another, like, I just don't have an explanation for why it was 3:45 when I looked at the walkie-talkie. And then to like 2:36, I believe, whenever I looked at it the second time. It doesn't make sense. If everything was happening in the same moments leading up to this time, why is there that big of a time difference? And the only explanation that I could have is if we're talking about these two timelines like moving in sync with one another, is that everything that happened in little Robert's timeline, the timeline 2 is better, just happened that much quicker. Like in the cabinetry world, if you ever look at cabinet doors, right, there's reveals that we call them reveals, that are in between each door, and usually the standard is like an 1/8 inch reveal. So in between each cabinet door, there's about an 1/8. And whenever you're installing cabinet doors and you have to and you're basically like adjusting them so that they all match, if you leave like a 30-second extra on the left side of the door and you have like a row of 8, that adjustment, right, multiplies as you get through every single door. And then once you get to the last door, all of those 30 seconds of an inch now add up to that last door being like a quarter out of square or something, And so that's the only way that I can maybe like kind of like process that in my head as far as like trying to make sense of it, is that everything just happened just a scooch quicker throughout that day, to where at the very end of it, whenever I'm now sitting up in the grass, added up to a different time.
I really like that comparison. It also is just indicative of how you think and how your mind works. And to me, you're so far off from the type of person that's vibe based and kind of floating through the world. Like, me, I lose track of myself. I lose track of time. I'm in my own head, not paying attention to the details sometimes. You do not seem like that type of person. And also, you've had a job since you were 13. It just does not seem, I can eliminate that possibility.
Yeah, no, like one of the best things that you can do to ever keep a job is punctuality, So I've always been, I'm not in any way, shape, or form like a vibe type of person. I don't like believe in ghosts or anything like that. I am very straight to the point, and I look at like, I believe, on what I can test and like what I can, experience. And, everybody telling, like my dad mainly being like, oh, you probably just had a weird micro concussion or something. Like, I would love to believe that, because that's a solid answer. You know what I mean? Like there's science I can put behind that, and like, oh, okay, that's Occam's razor. Like the simplest answer is usually the most the most correct. But I moved to Colorado whenever I turned 18, after I got done hiking the Appalachian Trail. I was like, I'm never going to live anywhere where there aren't mountains, And so I moved to Colorado, and I snowboarded a lot. And I had a lot of friends that got concussions. Like my roommate got a concussion, and I had to pick him up from the hospital, And there's the constant like reset of memory after you get like a concussion. I only know this from my roommate, because like when I had to pick him up from the hospital, constantly the whole entire time I'm like walking him out of the hospital, he kept asking me, he's like, wait, what's going on? Like, where are we at again? And I'm like, dude, you had a concussion. I'm bringing you home. And he'd be like, oh, okay. Was I snowboarding? Yeah, dude, you were snowboarding. Let's just hop on the bus and let's just go home. And then as soon as we get on the bus, he'd all of a sudden have another freak out. He's like, wait, where are we? What's going on? And I had to constantly retell him, like, hey, you had a concussion, So the only reason why I don't like believe I had a concussion is because it was only 2 minutes, apparently, from when Robert saw me, hanging out on the back of the three-wheeler. He stops it. He goes off into the woods to go take a piss. And then he comes back and he sees me running out of the grass. It was that short amount of time. So if I did get some type of small concussion, one, like, how would I be able to wake up from that and still have perfect clarity, and not, clarity up into the point that I'm saying, something happened to me that, that nobody else believes. But I wouldn't have been able to just jump up and just been perfectly fine,
Did you have adrenaline?
Oh, yeah. I think
you were still
I
rushing from like the crash you thought you were in.
Yeah. Like, well, not only that, it was like the sheer shock of like, just, like you just experienced this. It happened to you. It's in your head, and then you're up and you're trying to figure everything out. Like that level of, like, I don't necessarily know if I would call it anxiety or anything, but it was just the sheer shock of the switch. You know what I mean? Like my adrenaline was definitely pumping, and it was, I would akin it more to just kind of like the panic that I was kind of in, because it was just, none of it made sense. Like I was just there. And I was just covered in rain and mud, and I had just flown through the air. And, and I had gotten, I had like fallen off the three-wheeler before, and that alone was just scary enough to me, So that level of, like I said, that thing, we hit it fast, and I got thrown. And,
let me ask you this too.
Yeah.
The log on the ground, I know people are going to trip up on it. And like, I've personally been able to pretty much eliminate it. But how many logs are in the area where you're at? Is it like a forest?
Yeah, it's definitely a forest.
So there's logs all over the place.
Yeah. But not necessarily like so Florida, like forests, there's usually not a lot of like super thick, like old trees, especially like at least in the area that we were working in, it's more along the lines of like there's these solid little like tight groves that kind of like grow in the area. I believe I think it would probably be anywhere like cedar or maybe some more skinny maples that were kind of like in the area. And so you wouldn't see, like, if anyone's familiar with like, like hiking around forests, like for example, like in Colorado, you'll see huge, like basically like overgrown tree graveyards where there's just a bunch of limbs and trunks all stacked, like just broken all over top of each other. So it wasn't necessarily like there were logs everywhere, but there weren't logs like that. You know what I mean? It wasn't like thick, huge, like trees that you have to climb over that have fallen, like, who knows how long, it was a lot more sparser, but yeah, there were logs like all throughout the forest area.
I'm sure some people might think like, oh, you guys are working with like diesel fumes, like maybe you inhaled something, like maybe something you were burning. Do you think that's a possibility? I mean,
No, I don't think that's a possibility. Diesel doesn't like work the same way that gasoline does whenever you use it as like an igniter. It doesn't like explode like gasoline does. It more along the lines of like just burns a little bit deeper. And the fumes from diesel, like we were never like covered in this stuff or anything like that. We would just back the three-wheeler up close enough, and then we had a nozzle, like a small little spray nozzle that was hooked up on one side of the tank, and then the other side had basically like what you would see at like a gas station, and there's a little motor that's on top of the diesel tank, and it basically causes it to give you enough pressure to kind of like spray it out. And we would only ever use the gas station style pump to refuel machines. We would use this other, it's like smaller sprayer. And we weren't dousing these things, it was more, you spray just a little bit to kind of get a fire going more in the center of the burn pile. And then you kind of like let it do its thing. You don't want to it's not like we're like driving around the woods willy-nilly, just spraying diesel fuel everywhere. It was, you would spray just a little bit, get the fire going, and then, kind of let it go. If it started to die, you spray just a little bit more, keep it going again, and then just keep watching it.
And you guys were doing this every day too, so it would be
yeah.
likely that it would have happened before, or maybe it would have been likely that little Robert. Little Robert.
It's
Almost said
Russell
little
Robert,
Richard.
man. It's hard. I know. Yeah.
little Robert would have probably experienced the same thing if you guys were inhaling something weird.
Oh yeah, totally. No, and like to be like, I know this is gonna sound like really gross, but my dad would tell me stories about how he once caught his workers actually like drinking the diesel fuel to be able to get like drunk off of it. And I don't know if that was just a tall tale by him, but if you could drink it, I don't necessarily think it would have that like kind of instantaneous like psychedelic effect, if anything, if you were to try and breathe it in, because that would probably be happening to people at gas stations all the time,
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what in the forest of Florida could have like naturally produced that.
Yeah, I mean,
trust me,
like,
I have a lot of friends in Florida who, if there was something in the forest that could make you hallucinate like that, they would have found it.
yeah. Like the closest thing that I've ever came across is that I was once like walking around in the woods with my brother-in-law, and we were he had like, it was like the first time that I ever got to like shoot a gun, and he like stops and at like a cow patty, and he's just like, oh my God, these are mushrooms, and he grabbed that. That's the closest thing that I've ever seen of like, wild psychotropic of plants or, what have you, being just naturally in the woods,
But they don't even do that to you.
No, not that quickly either, no. And I trust me, I wasn't eating mushrooms at the time that I was 14 years old, even though I am from Florida and everybody thinks that.
Oh, well, let me ask you this then. What do you make of this? What do you think happened to you if you had to just look back on this and like gun to your head, really take a guess?
Yeah, I have, like I said, I'm a very simple person when it comes to how I look at the world and everything. I don't believe in auras. I don't believe in ghosts or, astrology or anything like that. And so I've never really had anything close to an answer until I was actually in college at Colorado Mountain College. Go Eagles. I had a professor there. It was actually my art history professor, and I was having this. I had basically, told her the whole story because we were kind of like going back and forth. Like I can't remember exactly what her story was, but just like sharing like weird things that have happened to us, And I kind of like described it to her, and I was just like, I know you're gonna look at me like I'm crazy, but it is what it is. This is kind of how I experienced it, and I don't really have an answer for it. And she starts talking to me about like the whole like many worlds theory of quantum mechanics, and in particular one kind of like fringe idea that involves with the many worlds theory, which is this thing known as quantum immortality. And basically how she described it to me was that there's like a binary relationship between an observer and the observed, and reality itself, if there's nothing to observe, reality, if there's nothing to be able to see it, then you can't 100% prove that it exists, right? And that goes vice versa. If you don't have anything to base your observations off of, then you can't prove that, that you exist. Like if I cut off every single one of my senses and then removed my memory, right, I would have no frame of reference or anything like that to be able to observe that I actually was here, And she says that she was talking to me and she was basically saying, like whenever you make a decision, she's like, say you're at a cliff, and you're deciding whether or not you're going to jump off the cliff. Whenever you make that decision, and the idea of this thought experiment will just say, reality fractures into two, and like the large scale of things, reality like fractures into like a bunch of different possibilities, like infinitesimal amount. But for this thought experiment, we'll just say two, one being where you die and the other one being where you live. She's like, if the reality that you jumping off the cliff and you die, like that's it. You're not observing anything anymore. You can't observe your own non-existence. So therefore, the one that keeps going, is the one where you decide not to jump off the cliff and you continue to observe, and therefore reality continues to exist in that dimension. And she's like, now think about it this way, like imagine you keep walking, you walk away from that first cliff and you keep going on with your life. And then you get to another cliff and you have to make the decision on whether or not you're going to jump off. And then again, reality fractures at that point. And then you get to another cliff and then to another cliff and then to another cliff and then to another cliff. So the only way that I would have been able to get concussion, right, is if he goes into the woods, I hop off the 3-wheeler and I trip on a rock and hit my head on that log or something, like that's not enough force to break that log. And if I did get knocked out, there's no way that I'm just going to jump back up perfectly fine without a welt or a cut or anything on my head within the span of 2 minutes. I've never seen anybody recover from a concussion that quickly or, have that level of clarity after it happened, so it's just, I can't prove that, you know what I mean? Like I can't figure out a concussion theory, all that I know is that, according to everybody else that was on that job site or, on that plot of land that day working, it never happened. And I'm the only one that experienced it, but yeah.
How has it affected the way you look at the world?
Well, one, second chances are awesome. So if if apparently I did die that day, and I'm now living in like a parallel dimension or whatever, I'm pretty thankful that I'm still alive and I'm still kicking and I'm still here. I think, I just try to make sure that I'm always doing good and like making myself proud in a way, if that makes sense. And so if I had to say, reflecting on that day, what I would say is that there's certain things in your life that you're just never going to get answers to. And, sometimes that's okay because you can drive yourself really, really crazy over obsessing about something that not only will you never be able to figure out, but also doesn't necessarily need an answer. Like I've lived a great and successful life so far, in my opinion, without that ever being answered, and at this point, like if anybody wants to help me figure it out, that's super cool. But if I never do, I'm okay with that. And, I know in the wise words of my grandfather, I know enough to know when I know enough to know that I don't need to know. You know what I mean? So
I think the craziest, maybe the saddest part of all of this is that, I almost forgot myself that you basically were given a second chance, like as close to a true miracle as one could ask for. Dying and being
I hate using the M word, but
I mean, it's close to that. I mean, the closest thing I've ever heard to that of being given a second life, basically. Like you died and then you woke up an hour before and this didn't happen. And the funny thing is that you didn't even get time to enjoy it. You didn't jump for joy or anything. You were just immediately confused and have been kind of tortured by this confusion ever since. It's like...
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say tortured, but yeah, definitely it's kind of annoying, but...
It's funny how we work like that.
Yeah.
It's never good enough, is it? Like...
Nah, yeah, totally, right? But I think, like calling it a second chance, calling it a gift, in my eyes, that's kind of all that matters was that, I am here now and I am a gift, I was given a gift and I don't necessarily need to know who gave it to me, or, I just know that the fact that it was given to me and therefore I need to, if I want to say anything like on the moralistic way of how I look at life after this event is that, I've done my best to honor the fact that I'm still, around and that, that I'm still kicking and living a beautiful life and I'm still able to experience love and, adventure and all of these things. So I don't worry about too much hardcore about, how it happened or, if it was aliens or if it was this or if it was that, that doesn't necessarily matter as much as the fact that it totally did happen to me. And because of that, I'm still able to sit here today and have this story with you,
All right, that brings us to the end of this episode. Like I said, I'm sure everybody has a range of interpretations of this story. For me, I think it's pretty fascinating and profound. I think many people would describe what Russell experienced as a miracle. Russell said that he does not want to use the M word as he described it, but I think a lot of people would look at it as simply that, a great gift. He's flying through the air to his death, and I've never been in that situation, but if I was, I'm sure I would find myself begging for a second chance. And he was given that. He woke up on the ground completely fine in a different day. I don't know how to explain that, but I'd say that based on his lived experience, he's a very lucky guy. So maybe it's best if he were to just accept it for what it is and be very grateful instead of asking a million questions about it and kind of agonizing about it over the years. But that's kind of in our nature. With that being said, thank you so much to Russell for telling the story. I should point out we did reach out to Little Robert, and he was able to confirm the details, but did not want to participate in the podcast itself. So, in case you were wondering, yeah, we did talk to Little Robert. But thanks again, Russell, for telling the story. This has been episode 16, and you've been listening to Otherworld. Otherworld is executive produced and hosted by myself, Jack Wagner. Our theme song is by Coberman. The soundtrack of this episode is by North Americans. Editing and engineering by Theo Schaefer. The artwork for our show is by Cul-de-sac Studios. This is an independent show, so please show us your support by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, and telling your friends about the show. If you want to follow us on social media, we're at Otherworld Pod on Instagram and Twitter. Also, if you or somebody you know has experienced something paranormal, supernatural, or unexplained, you could send us the story at stories@otherworldpod.com. Also, we still have merch for sale. If you want to check that out, it's otherworldpod.com.